So 2001 is pretty freaking awesome. And it's my personal favorite film of all time. And it's for a very simple reason. It's because it's the most unapologetically pure visual film. The story itself is razor thin. You know, it's basically these astronauts discover a strange device on the moon. It's beaming a signal to Jupiter. So they go to see what's happening on the old gas giant, right? And meanwhile, the artificial intelligence operating the entire spaceship, called HAL, he gains sentience, right? And he has decided that the astronauts are fallible creatures that will endanger the mission unless HAL eliminates them. Where I see little talk about online is the plot hole that I think both Clark and Kubrick probably ignored intentionally for obvious reasons. And the plot hole isn't, something with a vague nature to its existence, like where did the monolith on Earth go? Or how come Dave didn't have to touch the monolith that was floating around in space in order to ascend to the next level, right? So those type of plot holes can be answered by just the strange unknown nature of the monolith. So I don't think those plot holes count. The plot hole I'm referring to is Hal has control of the Discovery 1 spaceship. He has control of the cryo chambers. He has control of the pod bay doors. He's capable of running diagnostic checks on the ship. I mean, for all reasons and purposes, Hal has control of the Discovery 1. So when he realizes Dave and Frank are plotting against him just before the intermission happens, why doesn't Hal just cut off their oxygen supply? Or open all the doors, exposing them to space and sucking them out? Well, first, Hal doesn't do those things because otherwise the story doesn't happen, all right? And I think Clark and Kubrick realized this and proceeded forth anyway. Now, that said, I think there is still enough crumbs in the film to suggest a debatable reason why Hal doesn't cut off the oxygen supply. While most of me is just like, well, it doesn't happen because the story has to happen, right? The story has to take priority. It's like, sometimes it's just like that. But the other part of me is like, well, you could find a reason for why Hal doesn't do that. And I think it's for the same reason Moonwatcher, the ape in the opening scene, chooses to use the bone of the animal as a weapon instead of a tool. And I think it's because Stanley is making a comment on the condition of sentience. Specifically, it's biased toward violence. There's a context in 2001 that few people who've watched the film would know about unless they read the script, and that context is sort of introduced the moment Moonwatcher throws the bone into the sky, and you have essentially the largest time jump in cinematic history. Literally, it's like a 1,000,000-year time jump to a spacecraft in the sky. Now, watching the film for the first time, that cut is sort of communicating the progress of human civilization and the evolving of technology from literally a carcass bone to a giant piece of metal flying in space. That's sort of what you take away on the first watch. But if you've read the script, there's a small detail that otherwise isn't really highlighted in the film. I mean, if you look super closely, you notice tags on the spaceship saying, like Air Force, or even the Russia, China, Egypt, Germany. Like, you see like little flags. So you're kind of, there's this a picture being painted if you just look really closely. But when you read the script, it's loud and clear. And it creates this context around 2001 that's frankly quite haunting. And it's all happening during this montage with the Blue Danube. And you're seeing all the different satellites. Now, the space satellites that you're seeing there, in the script, it tells you exactly what kind of spaceships those are. And they're nuclear missile satellites. And in the script, there's a narrator who delivers this sort of expository on the state of Earth. And frankly, if you thought that 2001 was a timeless film, just listen to this excerpt from the script of 2001. I'm going to read you what the narrator says during the Blue Danube sequence. Here's what he says. By the year 2001, overpopulation has replaced the problem of starvation. But this was ominously offset by the absolute and utter perfection of the weapon. Hundreds of giant bombs had been placed in perpetual orbit above the Earth. They were capable of incinerating the entire Earth's surface from an altitude of 100 miles. Perhaps were further complicated by the presence of 27 nations in the nuclear club. There had been no deliberate or accidental use of nuclear weapons since World War II, and some people felt secure in this knowledge. But to others, the situation seemed comparable to an airline with a perfect safety record. In showed admirable care and skill, but no one expected it to last forever. Notice how Kubrick intentionally wrote this line in the past tense. And when I first read that line, it immediately made me think of Christopher Nolan's commentary on the use of nuclear weapons in his film Oppenheimer, and sort of the connotations of discovering nuclear fission, right? Now, obviously, these things ended up on the cutting room floor, and aside from the American, German, Chinese, Egyptian markings on the different spaceships, you wouldn't know they were nuclear satellites unless somebody told you. But knowing that context, it shines more light on the concept of man's bias toward weapons instead of tools. So when Hal becomes sentient, Kubrick makes an even bigger stretch into the future by suggesting that artificial intelligence could not only become sentient, but could even choose violence over logic, the same way humans can.